It started with a sound I'll never forget, the hollow thud of metal stakes hitting soft soil. When I stepped out onto my porch that morning, there were surveyor flags running across my property line like a trail of red lies fluttering in the wind. Men in reflective vests stood on my land, pointing, marking, measuring, as if it already belonged to them. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some mix-up with the county records, or a misplaced boundary marker. My family had owned this land for generations, 142 acres of woods, pasture, and a private reservoir that I'd spent years restoring. It wasn't just property, it was heritage. But the men out there didn't care about that. They were working under orders, the HOA's orders. The new development next door had been creeping closer for months. You could hear the sound of nail guns and concrete mixers echoing through the valley. But this time, it wasn't just noise. They were building directly on my land. When I confronted the foreman, he didn't even look up from his clipboard. "You'll have to take that up with the board," he said. The board! Those 3 words were the start of everything that followed. See, this wasn't just some neighborly misunderstanding. The Homeowners Association, the very same one that had started as a small, polite group to maintain community standards, had grown into a private empire. They had lawyers, lobbyists, and city council connections. And somehow, through a maze of shady zoning changes and replatted boundaries, they'd convinced the county that 35 of their new luxury homes sat squarely within their jurisdiction, which now, apparently, included my land. When I went to the courthouse to dispute it, I was told the paperwork was already finalized. My property line had been adjusted, as if someone had just nudged a fence post. What they'd done, in reality, was steal nearly 20 acres. 20 acres that bordered the dam I had built with my own hands. That dam wasn't just a structure. It was the reason those hills stayed green through the summer, why the fish came back to the pond after years of drought, why the old mill creek stopped flooding every spring. It was my insurance against everything. And now, those 35 homes, with their manicured lawns, sprinklers, and artificial ponds, sat right below it. At first, I tried to play it the right way. Letters, meetings, polite conversations. I met with the HOA president, a man named Randall Pierce. The kind of man who never sweated, never blinked too long, and smiled like he was thinking 3 moves ahead. He told me, "We're all neighbors here. I'm sure we can find a fair solution." His definition of fair turned out to be offering me a generous payment for the stolen land, a fraction of its value. I refused. That's when things started getting strange. One morning I found a citation taped to my fence for unpermitted water control infrastructure, my dam. Then came a notice about potential environmental hazards. Then they sent someone from the county to inspect my property without permission. Every step of the way, I felt them tightening the noose. The HOA wasn't just building homes. They were building control. Over me, over my land, over everything I'd worked for. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how much I knew about water. The dam wasn't just a wall of earth. It had an outlet system, an old steel gate valve that could drain the reservoir in less than 12 hours. It was designed for emergencies, like if the water level ever rose too high. And I had rebuilt it, reinforced it, tested it. After the HOA built their 35 homes, they rerouted the drainage system, without asking me, so that their runoff flowed into my reservoir. That meant every time their sprinklers ran, every time it rained, their excess water ended up swelling my lake. They thought it was harmless. They thought my dam would handle it. And it did, until I decided it wouldn't. I remember sitting on the dock one evening watching the water ripple beneath the fading sun. From there, you could see the rows of new houses across the valley. Perfect symmetry. White fences. The reflection of their streetlights on the surface looked almost peaceful. But I knew what was hidden underneath that calm, the arrogance, the paperwork fraud, the threats. That night I went into my workshop and unlocked a small dust-covered box. Inside was a rusted wrench, the one my father had used to open the main valve decades ago. It still had his initials engraved on the handle. I don't know if I decided right then to use it. Maybe I just wanted to feel what control felt like again. For weeks, I watched them live on what used to be mine. I watched kids play on my hills. Families set up their new patio furniture over my soil. One man even bragged at a town meeting that his, quote, property had a natural lake view. My lake. The final straw came when I received a letter saying that the HOA was suing me for encroaching on their common area. The irony nearly made me laugh. They built on my land, and now they were accusing me of trespassing on it. That's when something inside me went cold. You spend your life trying to be reasonable, patient, lawful, but there's a point where being civilized just means letting people walk over you. And when they do it long enough, you start to wonder, what would happen if you just stopped caring? That night, I drove up to the dam. The air was still, the moon bright enough to see the valley below. You could almost make out the rooftops of the new homes, lined like a parade of arrogance. I parked near the old control shed, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The air smelled of metal and damp earth. The wrench felt heavy in my hands, like it remembered what it was built for. The gate valve creaked as I turned it, groaning like it hadn't been touched in years. At first, nothing happened. Then came the deep rumble, the kind that travels through your bones. The sound of water waking up. I watched as the lake level started to dip, inch by inch. Down below, the creek that ran through the development began to swell. Their storm drains weren't built for that kind of pressure. I knew it. They'd cut corners, saving costs on underground piping. They thought no one would ever test it. By morning, half their manicured lawns had turned into swamps, driveways cracked, retaining walls shifted. The HOA called it a natural drainage event. But I knew better. It wasn't destruction. It was balance. But that was only the beginning. Because once you open a dam, once you let the flow start, you realize you can't stop it with just one turn of the wrench. And neither could they. The following morning, Randall Pierce himself came knocking. His shiny SUV crunched over the gravel of my driveway like it didn't belong here, which it didn't. He stepped out in a crisp polo shirt, the kind of man who dressed like he was perpetually on his way to a board meeting. His smile was tight, his jaw tighter. "Morning," he said, glancing toward the dam in the distance. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about the little flood down there, would you?" I just looked at him. Let the silence stretch long enough for the wind to fill it. He laughed, forced, awkward. "We've got about 15 homes with water damage. The residents are concerned, obviously. They're saying it might be runoff from your property." I told him, plain and simple, that if the HOA wanted to control the water, maybe they shouldn't have built below the reservoir without asking the man who owned it. That's when he dropped the smile. "Be careful," he said. "You're playing with liability here. If that dam of yours fails, if anyone gets hurt, you won't just lose the land. You'll lose everything." He said it like he cared, but I could hear what he was really saying. He was reminding me that I was alone, and they weren't. After he left, I sat on my porch for a long time. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Just steady. There's a kind of quiet that comes when you've finally accepted that no one's coming to save you. The next few days, the HOA scrambled. They brought in engineers, inspectors, even a PR firm to calm the residents. They issued a statement calling it a minor water mismanagement issue. That made me laugh out loud. They were drowning in their own arrogance. And still, they couldn't call it what it was. Meanwhile, I got a letter from the county again, an urgent review of my dam safety permit. I knew they were behind it. Randall and his board had likely pulled strings to fast-track an investigation, hoping to find something, anything, to pin on me. But here's the thing about a man who builds with his own hands. He knows every inch of what he's made. I'd reinforced that dam 3 times over. Concrete core, overflow channel, double safety gates. There was nothing to find. Still, I played along. Let them come. Let them waste their time and taxpayer money, while I gathered something they couldn't fake: evidence. See, I had camera traps all over my land. Hidden ones. Motion activated. The kind I used to track deer. And over the weeks, they caught more than just wildlife. They caught HOA contractors walking onto my property without notice. They caught workers dumping debris near my water line. They even caught one man in a safety vest cutting through my fence with bolt cutters. When I showed that footage to my lawyer, he leaned back in his chair, smiled, and said, "Well, looks like they've just made your case for you." But I didn't want court victories. I wanted clarity. I wanted them to feel what I felt when I saw those red flags in the ground. So I waited. Another week passed, and the rain came. Hard. One of those relentless summer storms that doesn't stop for 3 days. The reservoir swelled again. I could see the water line licking the top of the embankment. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. A white pickup truck, headlights cutting through the fog, creeping up the access road near the dam. 2 men inside. HOA contractors. They parked near the control shed. One of them climbed out with a flashlight and bolt cutters. They were going to tamper with the gate valve, probably to open it, drain the lake, and blame me for failing maintenance. But I was already there. I stepped out of the shadows before they reached the lock. The beam of their flashlight froze on me. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" I said. The younger one stammered something about inspection authorization. The older one, calm, smug, said they were acting under orders from the HOA. I told them there was no inspection scheduled, no permission granted, no right to be there. And when I pulled out my phone and showed the county's own map proving the land was still mine, they went pale. They left, muttering something about a misunderstanding. But I knew better. They'd been sent to set me up, so I decided to give them exactly what they wanted: proof that I could be the villain they feared. The storm didn't stop. By midnight, the dam's overflow was roaring. I opened the auxiliary valve, just slightly, enough to let the pressure out, but also enough to make the creek roar like thunder through their perfect little streets. I stood there, rain soaking through my clothes, watching the water cut through their ornamental lawns, through the gravel paths they'd laid, through the flower beds they'd spent thousands on. It wasn't vengeance. It was nature reminding them who really ran this valley. The next morning, the HOA declared a, quote, state of emergency. Randall called me again, this time his voice trembling behind his rehearsed calm. "We need to work together," he said. "If this continues, homes will be uninhabitable." I told him I'd be happy to help once he restored my boundaries, admitted their trespass, and paid damages for unlawful construction. He hung up. 2 days later, I got another letter. Only this time, it wasn't from the HOA, it was from a federal agency. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was using a private water structure to endanger public property. They were trying to take it to a higher level now. But what they didn't realize was that every move they made just built a stronger record, for me. Every citation, every complaint, every illegal action was documented. Layered, like sediment building a mountain, I was patient. Patient the way water is. It doesn't strike all at once. It erodes, quietly, persistently, until the structure that thought it could contain it finally collapses. And collapse they did. Because when the investigation came through, when the federal inspectors reviewed the maps, the property lines, the construction permits, they discovered something the HOA had never intended anyone to find. Half of those 35 homes weren't just on my land. They were built over an unregistered floodplain. All it took was one report, one signature, and the entire development was reclassified as unsafe for residential habitation. Suddenly, the HOA's empire started to crumble from within. Insurance companies withdrew coverage, property values nosedived, homeowners demanded answers. Randall vanished from public view. Rumor was he'd moved states. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just stood on that same dock one evening, looking out over the reservoir, listening to the quiet that had finally returned. They thought they could own the land, but land isn't owned. It's borrowed. From time, from nature, from history. And if you forget that, it has a way of reminding you. Still, I knew it wasn't quite over. Because even when the flood recedes, something always remains buried underneath. Something waiting to rise again when the next storm comes. It took nearly 6 months for the headlines to fade. Subdivision declared uninhabitable. Homeowners sue HOA for negligence. Federal probe into illegal zoning. Each one printed in black ink what I'd known since the day I saw those survey flags, that they were playing with something they didn't understand. But even after the chaos, after the lawsuits, the evacuations, the foreclosure signs, I still couldn't sleep. Every night, I'd hear it. The faint sound of running water. Not from the reservoir, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere beneath everything that had happened. People think revenge gives closure. It doesn't. It just leaves a silence that's too clean. I started repairing the land that had been torn up, hauled out debris, replanted trees, and let the dam rest. The water level dropped to a calm mirror again. Some days deer would come drink at dawn like they used to. It was peaceful, but never innocent again. Then one morning, a black SUV rolled up the dirt road. Government plates. 2 men stepped out, suits too clean for the countryside. One introduced himself as an investigator with the Bureau of Reclamation. The other said he represented, quote, federal interests regarding water management. They weren't there to arrest me. Not exactly. They wanted to understand how the whole thing happened, how a private HOA managed to build on federal floodplain territory without anyone noticing. I told them everything. Showed them the permits, the footage, the letters, the map overlays. One of them whistled low when he saw how deep the corruption went. County clerks signing off on falsified plats, inspectors looking the other way, developers cutting deals to rush construction. They thanked me for my cooperation, but as they walked away, one of them turned back and said something that stuck with me. You'd be surprised how many of these end the same way. A man tries to protect what's his, and everyone calls him the problem until they need him to fix it. That night, I sat by the reservoir again. The dam loomed behind me, silent, steady, patient. The sky reflected on the water like a memory trying to forget itself. It hit me that this land had seen it all. Wars, droughts, floods, generations of hands passing down the same dirt. And every time someone tried to claim it as their own, it reminded them who was really in charge. A few months later, I got a letter from the new county commissioner. A different tone this time. Apologetic, respectful. They'd redrawn the property lines, officially restoring my land to its original boundaries. They even offered compensation for the administrative errors. I didn't cash the check. Money wasn't the point. The point was that the map finally told the truth again. But the story didn't end there. Because the residents who'd lost their homes, not all of them left. Some stayed, renting trailers near the edges of the valley. They'd stop by sometimes, just to talk. At first, they were angry. They thought I'd caused everything. But when they learned what really happened, how their HOA had built their dream homes on stolen land, that anger shifted. One of them, an older man who'd lost nearly everything, said something that I'll never forget. They told us this place was paradise, he said. But paradise built on someone else's sweat always sinks. That's when I decided to do something no one expected. Instead of fencing the land off again, I opened it, created a wildlife restoration zone, built hiking paths where the roads used to be, and let the dam feed into small irrigation channels for local farmers. I used what they had tried to control as something that gave back. The irony was perfect. The same water that destroyed their neighborhood became the life that fed everything around it. A reporter came by one afternoon, said she was writing a feature about the man who beat the HOA. I told her I didn't beat anyone. The land just remembered who it belonged to. She laughed, said that kind of humility would make a good headline. But I wasn't being humble, I was being honest. Because the truth is, when you've stood alone against a machine that big, one that tries to rewrite the earth beneath your feet, you realize something deeper about power. It never really belongs to the ones who think they have it. It belongs to the ones who can wait. Years later, the development site became a kind of ghost valley. Concrete foundations cracked, weeds split through driveways, and the signs that once boasted, "Lakeside Estates, a community of elegance," rusted in the sun. Sometimes hikers would ask if I ever regretted it, opening that dam, letting it all flow. I'd tell them this: when someone builds on your land without your permission, it's not just your soil they're stealing, it's your history, your story, your silence. You can rebuild houses. You can't rebuild that kind of peace. And as long as that dam stands, I'll let it serve as a monument, not to revenge, but to memory. Because the thing about water is, it always finds its way home.